Welcome to the Ricci Flow Nutrition Podcast. My name is Cameron Borg. On this episode, I had the pleasure of speaking with Anadi Martel. Anadi is a physicist and electronics expert. He designs experimental instruments for use in the exploration of sound and light. He also acts as a consultant for special projects for diverse organizations such as IMAX, Cirque du Soleil, and the Metropolitan Opera of New York. His sound spatialisation devices have been used throughout the world by artists of international renown as well as by NASA. For 40 years, he's carried out research on light and its applications, having developed new devices integrating light, sound, and touch. A number of these inventions have been patented, such as the light modulation process. During the 7 years leading up to 2018, Anadi Martel was president of the International Light Association, a group of researchers exploring the therapeutic applications of light. The ILA acts as a bridge between leading scientists offering the latest research and the practitioners of diverse forms of light therapy. He is also the creator of the multi-sensorial therapy system called Sensora. Considered to be one of the most advanced systems in the world in this field, the Sensora combines audio, visual, and kinesthetic stimulation to produce a profound integrative experience, effective as therapeutic support in numerous clinical applications. Anadi is also the author of the book Light Therapies, a comprehensive guide to the therapeutic benefits of light and colour and how they affect our physical and psychological well-being. I had a fantastic time speaking with Anadi. He's incredibly humble, knowledgeable, and open-minded. I believe his work and the work of his colleagues will truly be at the centre of medicine in the future. So with all that being said, I hope you enjoy the episode. I'm so appreciative of your time today, Anadi. I've been looking forward to this for a really long time. I'd love to know how you sort of started getting into light and studying light, particularly as a therapeutic agent.
Well, I'm a physicist by training. So, of course, light is one of the main subjects of exploration in physics, even though the real nature of light remains mysterious to this day. The greatest physicists have been trying to understand and analyze its nature. So that was my original interest in light. And then when I was a teenager, I became interested in meditation. And that brought me to a different angle, a different way of looking at light. And I ended up spending a few years in India studying meditation, and that opened up many dimensions. And well, ever since, I've been trying to kind of bring together those two visions. The inner vision of light, which everyone is familiar with, and that all civilizations since the dawn of mankind have been pursuing. I mean, light is synonymous with the highest forms of consciousness forever. We have this word enlightenment. So there's this whole dimension of light as a representation of consciousness, an inner contact with the nature of light, and of course the physical nature of light, because light is a completely physical phenomenon. It's basically the main energy source that's powering our whole planet. Most of our energy comes from the sun under the form of light. So you can't get any more physical than that. It's a truly basic component of the physical reality. So I've always been fascinated by this duality of light, in the sense that it's both a completely physical phenomenon and it's somehow linked with more subtle dimensions of consciousness. And that tells a lot about what you can do with light if you start to explore its potential for healing and therapy, which is what I've been specializing in for a number of years.
So as a physicist, you mentioned that there are a few issues with the way that we think about light from a physical perspective. What are those problems as far as the particle wave duality goes with light? And do we really know, what light is at this point?
We really know what anything is at this point. I mean, the particle wave duality, of course, is a fundamental mystery of light, but it's actually not limited to light. All particles have this duality. Even if we talk of electrons and baryons and material particles, they have the same duality. They can be viewed as a wave or as a particle. And it's really one of the fundamental mysteries of quantum mechanics. And still today, there is no satisfactory resolution to this mystery. I just got this. So, but of course, light is kind of the most obvious example of this duality, because there are many simple experiments where it shows up. I mean, the dual slits line experiment is one of the most simple that you can perform, and still one of the most powerful in the way it reveals this mysterious nature of light. And so the question remains open. As far as I can see, some of the latest research seems to indicate that the true nature is the deepest form would be wave-like, and waves sometimes can agglomerate as packets or condense and then are perceived as particles. But this is just one simplification of a fundamental mystery, which probably is at the core of what we are still missing in our understanding of physics as a whole. I'm sure that once we have a clear vision of the real nature of that mystery, there we'll be much farther ahead in things like unitary physics theory and so on.
There's a lot of spiritual people saying that we are light beings. All of our cells communicate with light, and at the most fundamental level, we are made of light. To what extent is that true, and how are cells communicating with light?
Well, ever since Einstein, we know that energy and matter are equivalent. So light is pure energy. It's a zero mass particle. So it's our purest expression of what pure energy is, basically, in terms of physical reality. And because we are made of particles, material particles, there is this equivalence with energy or light. So in this kind of very practical, technical aspect, you could say that every matter is a form of condensed light. But I think what people refer to when they talk about this idea of us being beings of light is probably refers to something else. To me, it would refer to the fact that basically we are conscious beings. And it relates to the fact that consciousness is one of our fundamental aspects beyond the body. Whether you talk about consciousness or light, they're kind of synonymous in many ways and in many formulations. So that's another aspect coming from there. And so all that is true. The question is, of course, beyond a simple philosophical point of view, what can you make of it? What does it mean in practice?
Yeah, that's a beautiful answer, and I think, like you said, it is a very, very open question, which is exciting, I think, for future generations to discover. I've heard that John Wheeler said once that if you look up at a star, then the photons that from that star that hit your eye would have never left that star unless you were there to perceive it. I don't know if that's true, or I certainly couldn't understand the mathematics, but, first of all, is that true? And how is light having this sort of non temporal aspects to it.
Well, I guess here you're referring to the the fact that the non-locality of light, but also of any particle. Again, it applies to all physical, all quantum particles, whether we talk about light or matter. And indeed, all recent experiments being performed with greater and greater precisions are confirming the non-local aspect of quantum particles. Non-local in the sense that there can be action, instant action, linking particles in different localities of space. If particles have been in contact, if their waveforms have been mixed at some point, even if you separate them by however far, there apparently remains some kind of link between them, which is instantaneous, non-local. So now, does that tie in with consciousness? This is a basic mystery, and it's related to the fact that there's a whole school in quantum mechanics that asserts that reality is caused by the presence of consciousness, in the sense that the quantum waveform collapses when an observer perceives it. And that would bring to the foreground the importance of consciousness in reality. Now, this point of view is not universally recognized by physicists. It's one school of thought that sees things in this way. But it's good to remember that actually nobody knows. The question is not resolved to this date. It remains part of the deepest mysteries that physics is touching. And the same goes when we talk about consciousness. We kind of take for granted in our societies, our Western societies, which are really science-based and materialistic, based on a materialistic viewpoint, reductionist materialistic viewpoint. It's so much ingrained in our perception and our culture that we take it for granted that this is the way things are. We don't really question it. And this is why we have medicine, for example, is looking for intelligence and consciousness by analyzing the brain and neurons. From this point of view, it's clear that consciousness is a byproduct of the matter and the electrical fields within your brain. There's no question. This is the point of view that's the accepted scientific point of view. And if you start talking about anything else, such as that consciousness might exist separately from the brain, for example, you are very quickly relegated to some non-reliable actor. So it's good to remember that things are not so clear-cut. There is a sizable proportion of scientists, and among them some of the greatest, actually, that don't feel that the question is so clear-cut, and that for whom consciousness might very well be the fundamental substratum of reality, and matter is secondary. Matter is an epiphenomenon of this fundamental substratum that is consciousness. It's the reverse viewpoint from the materialistic viewpoint, where, of course, matter is fundamental and consciousness is a byproduct of matter. And again, it's good to remember that the question is not at all resolved, either one way or the other. And it's good to keep an open mind about these different options.
So I think the great part about light as a therapeutic agent used for human health is we don't need to understand it to know that it does work, which is fantastic. So what has been your relationship to using light as a therapeutic agent?
Well, it's a long story. the thing is that light has so many dimensions to it. It's so fundamental to our life and to our existence at so many levels that it can touch us in many different ways. And because of that, there are a great number of modalities of using light for health, very different ways of using light. And that can sometimes bring confusion in people's mind, because they will see these very different ways of using light, different forms of light therapy. And they seem to be so different that they don't have much relation. And so, for example, you can use light for the body. Light has a direct cellular effect. It will stimulate cellular metabolism. It can help to repair cell DNA. That's the whole phenomenon of photobiomodulation that is now very well documented, and that's being actively researched by thousands of scientists currently. And that's relatively new. It's only in the past 20 years or so, 30 years that science has been able to approach this aspect of light. So light brings energy to cells. You can use it to heal cells, and so on. So that's one form of light therapy. Then you have this whole other connection of light with consciousness, with cognition, with our visual perception. And that brings on a whole other world of using light and colors. Because we all know that colors affect us in different ways. The perception of colors has a very subjective component to it, because it touches mind. It touches our past, our memory, our experiences. Because of that, it can be used in psychotherapy in powerful ways. So that's a whole other way of using light. But that's actually more the modality that I've been working with personally, that I've been developing with my instruments. And then there's yet another modality that's part of our life now, and that's really connected with the part of the optic nerve that is not related to vision. It's what's called the non-visual optic pathway. And that links directly our retina, our eye, with the core of the brain, the hypothalamus. And that completely bypasses the visual centers. And that particular part of the optic nerve has a direct influence on our hormonal balance, on our inner clock, on our circadian rhythms. Again, that's a whole other different way in which light can have a deep impact on our body, on our balance, and our equilibrium. So you see already these very different layers at which light can act.
Yeah, sorry, continue.
Oh, that's okay. I think you were asking how I got interested in that, and gradually over the years I got in touch with different parts of these aspects, and I've explored them. But originally, my interest was connected with again, meditation. I was curious to see if there were ways to use sound and light to bring more harmony, more inner harmony, to deepen meditation, to heal psychic wounds in a way. So I explored first sound, and then gradually I got interested in the brainwave aspect of things, measuring brainwaves, influencing brainwaves. And then the connection with light gradually emerged out of that, because light is a powerful way to interact with brainwaves. And so gradually over the years, I was brought to this.
Wonderful. I'd love to go back and talk about the energetic portion or the non-visual portion of the optic system, and how it links to circadian rhythms. We've spoken a little bit about the benefits of light, but what can be some of the downsides of the way we use light in the modern world?
Well, obviously, if any form of therapy is powerful enough to affect your health, bring some healing, it means that it can also have detrimental effects if it's used in the wrong way or applied in an inverse way. So because light is so powerful, it can lead to beautiful healing modalities, but it can also heal to disorders. Again, in many different ways. You can burn your skin, for example, if you have the wrong kind of UV light. You can the whole circadian aspect of things has come to the forefront in the past 20 years or so. And now we understand much more clearly that it's a certain part of the spectrum is especially relevant when we talk of the hormonal balance influence, the suppression of melatonin and so on. And of course, it's the blue part of the spectrum that is significant there, because the cells that are connected in the retina to this non-visual optic pathway, the famous the IPRGCs, are sensitive to the blue part of the spectrum. So it's specifically the blue colors, the blue photons that have this maximum effect on our inner rhythm. And the body evolved this mechanism as a beautiful way to synchronize our inner clock to the daylight cycle. So this whole system is designed to perceive the bright midday light of the sun and use that as a signal to re-entrain our clocks, to tell our inner clock that this is midday, so you can organize all our inner rhythms according to that. And the problem naturally comes when we start to have a less natural lifestyle and we are not exposed to that bright midday light, as can easily be the case if we live indoors, or if we live in northern latitudes where the light diminishes in wintertime. What happens when you start to lose that regular daily reset, is that your rhythm can drift, and it can seem relatively minor. Of course, it can lead to sleep issues and stress and things like that. But if it goes on for years on end, it goes much deeper. It can bring much more serious disorders like diabetes, cancer now, and this type of trouble now are linked to a disturbed circadian rhythm. And so this has led to the whole light modality called bright light therapy. Of course, now everybody has heard of these bright lights that you can use in the morning to re-entrain your rhythm. And actually to such an extent that in people's mind, this is synonymous with light therapy. When somebody talks about light therapy, people automatically associate it with this bright light modality. Whereas actually it's just one of the numerous forms of light therapies. Many forms of light therapies don't act through this non-visual pathway, which requires intense light, and use much lower levels of light, different colors than blue, to work. So again, it's important not to mix the terminology. When we talk of light therapy, it's a generic term. It should mean all different modalities of using light. And the one that is specifically linked to the non-visual optic pathway should be called bright light therapy.
Yeah, well, it's a very, very robust literature at the moment with the effects of modern lighting, particularly at night. It's quite difficult to avoid in the modern world, and all of our modern light bulbs are extremely highly blue lit. Is there anything we can do to sort of offset the effects of that blue at night? You know, I've got, red globes and red glasses. Are those things that people can do to protect themselves?
Sure. It's really a matter of education, getting to understand a little better the issue. And actually, it's a relatively new issue. It's never been important until the last few years, I would say less than 5 years, because of a very simple fact, because we are now in the midst of a technology change in our lighting. We're just moving from incandescent lights, which have been used for over a century since Edison's time, and we are shifting now to LED lights. And the LED lights bring to the fore these questions, because for the first time, they can generate spectrums of light emission that are very different from the natural spectrum of light. It's a happy coincidence that the incandescent light that we've been using for the past century are thermal sources. It's a hot filament glowing, and it's a very similar physical phenomenon to sunlight. The sun is also a hot globe of gas at the corona at the surface, about 5,000 K, and it generates light with this broad continuous spectrum. And if you look at the incandescent light, it's exactly the same black body wide spectrum. It's just shifted a bit because the temperature is more towards 3,000 K than 5,000 as the sun, but basically its nature is similar. So we've been using this artificial light that has a very similar spectrum to natural light. And therefore, there's been no problems because we've just been nicely fitting into the natural sensitivity of our organisms. And so we've kind of gotten used to the idea that artificial light is fine. It's not an issue. And suddenly, now that LEDs are come in the game, we kind of take them for granted and don't really look more closely. And of course, it's leading to a number of problems which are now coming to the forefront of the mainstream culture. So everybody now has heard of the issues in blue light, circadian rhythm. And so fortunately, things are starting to change because, as you mentioned, LED light bulbs often have an excess of blue. But there is no necessity for this. Technologically, you can very well make LED light bulbs which don't have this excess of blue. It's just a matter of where you put the emphasis. Originally, when this started, people put the emphasis on energy saving. It was the whole reason for being for these LED light bulbs, because they consume a lot less energy. And economics, they have to be cheap. So engineers have been looking for the maximally energetically effective spectrums. And it so happens that those are the ones that have a lot of blue. And the focus has been there in the beginning. And now that we are becoming aware of the risks associated with that, the culture is changing, and it's gradually seeping down to manufacturers. And now you can very well choose the temperature of the light bulbs that you buy in the hardware stores. And one very basic thing to do is to use only lower color temperature bulbs in the home, like below 3,000 K, like 2,700 K, something like that. What's called soft light or warm white and so on. And if you do that, already you will cut a lot of the problems, because we use, of course, these light bulbs are used mostly at night. And this is when an excess of blue will start to disrupt your circadian rhythm. It also goes the other way. Some people are trying to use more bluish white, cool white with higher temperature in the daytime, so that it's more aligned to daylight, and it helps to keep you awake, stimulate you, and so on. So this is an interesting aspect. It's what's called the human-centric lighting, where you can vary the color temperature of your lighting depending on the time of day. And hopefully this will eventually become standard. It will become the normal thing to do. But in the meantime, the very simple basic thing is to only use lower color temperature light bulbs in your home. There's another whole other aspect that is lesser known that's related to light noise. That's completely independent from the spectrum of the color of the light bulb. And it's the fact that LED technology often generates a high amount of light noise. Light noise simply refers to the fact that the light that is emitted by the bulb is not perfectly stable. It can contain high frequency components that are not visible. Your eye cannot perceive any rhythm faster than about 50 or 60 hertz. That's the flicker fusion frequency. So engineers have been making light bulbs which might flash at high frequencies. And because you don't perceive it, they concluded that it's fine and it's cheaper to make. So we end up with light bulbs that often emit high light noise. And it's becoming more and more clear that this is not so innocuous. It actually has detrimental effects, even if you don't perceive it consciously. It can lead to migraines and eye tension in people who are especially sensitive. And even for the rest of us who may not be so sensitive, this kind of constant low-level stress in the light source kind of accumulates. It kind of adds to our other environmental stresses like radio waves and chemical pesticides. So if you add again the unhealthy light component, pulsating light, it all adds up to what we see in our societies in terms of chronic illness and all kinds of disorders which medicine has trouble pinning down because they don't have a single cause. They're just the accumulation of stressors over years. So all that to come back to the fact that, again, technologically, there's no necessity for these LED light bulbs to emit noise. You can perfectly make them with very low noise, very clean light. It's just a little more expensive. It might be a little less energy efficient, but it's well worth the small differences. With the spectrum aspect, with the blue color aspect, it's easy to see it. You can see whether the light is bluish or more yellow. But with the light noise, it's hard to perceive, and you need an instrument to measure it, or a simple way is to translate light noise into sound, because your ear will be sensitive to these high frequencies. And that's what I've done with a small instrument here, the Light B, that converts light into sound. So you immediately, very easily can check the light sources in your home and just discard noisy light bulbs. And if you go to the hardware store, you'll see that a number of them are clean. Maybe, from what I've seen lately, maybe half or a third to half of the light bulbs are fairly stable. So that's another aspect of unhealthy light.
You're referring, is this colloquially termed the flicker effect of lights?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think it was first. That's how Meniere's disease was discovered with helicopter pilots, because the blades would flick past and people were getting migraines and vertigo-like symptoms. So it's certainly not innocuous. And what I usually do to check is to get the slow-mo camera on my phone, and then you can see the lights turning on and off.
That's a good technique as well.
Yeah. So it's very, very pervasive, and in all screens as well. To save energy, they'll turn on and off. So I know there are ways you can, if you have your screen light up the whole way, it flickers less, and then you can get apps to bring it down in another way. But this frequency effect of light makes me think about brain waves and sound as well. You mentioned before that you've done work with brainwave entrainment with Alzheimer's disease and neurodegenerative conditions. How do you use light in those situations?
Well, in the same way that light can be healing or health risk, It's the same thing about flicker. Flicker is a universal phenomenon. I mean, everything vibrates. And again, it can be used as a healing modality, or it can be very damaging. So it just depends on it's a question of frequency, and it's a question of intensity, and it's a question of rhythm, how long you're exposed to it. So it's not a simple issue. But when you start, when you talk about rhythms that fall below the range of what the eye can perceive, flicker fusion frequency, it happens that those frequencies, like below 50 hertz or so, correspond to the natural frequency at which our neurons fire. And there's this miraculous synchronization, this resonance of our billions of neurons, each one emitting a very tiny electrical charge. They fall in sync naturally, and they emit together a global electric field, which we perceive as brainwaves. And so the very functioning of our brain is linked to these various frequencies. And of course, we now know that you can associate different mental states with different brainwave frequencies. We've all heard of alpha waves, which are associated with relaxation, beta waves, which are associated with mental activity, delta waves, which are deep sleep. So when you start to work with frequencies that fall within that range, from between about 2 hertz to 60 or so, I mean, you can discuss what's the limit, because gamma brainwaves can be extended to 100, 200 hertz or possibly even more. But that frequency range can be used to interact with brainwaves. And that's through a very natural phenomenon of resonance. When you're exposed to any sensorial stimulus that has a frequency that flickers in a range that is within the range of our own natural biorhythm, our biorhythms will have a tendency to fall in sync with that external stimulus. And that works with all senses, basically. It works with vision, it works with sound, it works with touch. So it's just this natural resonance action. And so that has brought the whole field of audiovisual stimulation, where you will use flickers of light and sound to try to help to balance the brain, to bring it towards a healthier state. Or you can use it in neurofeedback, when you create a feedback between measurement of your brainwaves and some kind of external stimulus that you can sense. You can create a loop and use that for training. So there are many, many very interesting modalities based on that. And light is a beautiful way to work with this, because vision is really our foremost sense. The majority of our sensorial input comes from vision. So it's really the main gateway to influence the brain. So if you have light that flickers in those ranges, it will have a powerful impact. And everybody perceives this. I mean, everybody who's been in a discotheque with strong strobe lights knows how powerful this effect is. It really grabs you, and it can actually be dangerous. It can be overwhelming. And indeed, it is dangerous for people who are have a photosensitivity, because it can even trigger epileptic seizures. So it's a powerful phenomenon, and when properly handled, it can be a beautiful therapeutic modality. There are now a vast number of studies that have been done on different ways to apply this for all kinds of things, whether it's to help kids with autism, ADHD, to help with addictions, to help with Parkinson's. There are so many uses of this brainwave audiovisual stimulation modality.
Yeah, you I believe you developed a system called Sensora, which employs sound and light and color therapy as well. This is something that I've been extremely interested in recently, which is the effect of color on our psychological well-being. Um, is it kind of like music where people will respond differently to different colors? There's no there's no one size fits all, like red does this, blue does this. So how do you understand how to use color in a setting like that?
I wish it was so clear cut and easy. Actually, when I started this work, it was my assumption that this would have been worked out long ago. The effects of each color would be precisely known and reproducible. And unfortunately, it turns out not to be the case. And again, because light is such a multi-dimensional phenomenon, it acts on us at all levels, the body, the mind, the brain. It's not surprising that different colors have different effects on these different layers of our being and our organism. So there's no reason why the same colors should have the same effects on the body, for example, as they will have on the mind and the brain. It's perfectly obvious when you think about it that colors could have different effects depending on where you apply them. And so it's the case indeed when you start to work with colors, because again, just in terms of effects on the brain, there are numerous different brain centers, each with their own different sensitivity. And actually, the information of color that comes through the optic nerve is transmitted basically to all areas of the brain, not just to the visual centers in the back. If you look at the anatomy of the optic nerve, it has many different components. Apart from the one going to the visual centers, there's a component going directly to the core of the brain. There's a component going to the amygdala. And so there are links, direct links between the eye and all these different areas of the brain. And each one, most of these links carry the full color information. So color just basically reaches many different layers of the brain. So it can act sometimes in an unconscious way, and deep unconscious in our emotional response when you touch the amygdala and these centers. It can work in a very conscious way when you touch the visual centers and the cortex, then it can be linked to memories, to traumas. It can touch in ways that will affect directly our inner rhythms, like the breathing, heartbeat, heart rhythm also will be affected by colors. So when you start to analyze the effect of colors, you have to be very, very discerning as to what layer of the body or the mind you're trying to connect with. And this is also why it's quite confused. I mean, many people have been trying to study the effects of colors. And if you look at the literature, different clinical studies will come up with completely different results for the same colors. And so the tendency has been to conclude that there's nothing there, it's just random and it's not a valid medical modality. It's not at all the case. It's just that you have to be to understand more deeply the different layers and where you are having an effect. So that leads to all kinds of different light therapy modalities. And in my book, I list a number of them. For example, there's a section where there's about 20 different light color therapy systems. And each one has their own specialty, their own way of working. And when it's a well-designed system that's self-coherent, it usually has beautiful therapeutic results. And again, the meaning of colors may be different from one system to the other.
Yeah, that it's something I've been interested in because I thought, I've been wearing these at night, the red glasses, and I was thinking, I wonder what the filtering of all of those frequencies, below 550 could be doing to me psychologically. I've certainly not felt any ill effects, but is there a potential for some people to have psychological effects from wearing filtered glasses like that?
Oh, definitely. I mean, it is a form of therapy in itself to wear colored glasses. You can find on the market these sets of glasses which cover all colors of the rainbow. And it's beautiful experimentation to just put one specific color on, and immediately your world is transformed. You perceive things differently. And so it's clear that these colors have a deep impact on our inner perception, our psychology, and so on. So indeed, if you do this on the long term, if you were wearing, for example, a specific color for hours or days, it would probably have an impact on your being. So the whole goal of chromotherapy or using colors for healing is to understand what, if you are missing some colors, which colors would be the best for you at a given moment, and then to find ways to give you those colors in the purest form possible. And again, there are many ways to do this.
In the book, you also talk a little bit about acupuncture meridians and how, correct me if I'm wrong, but some group in Korea had discovered that they act somewhat like fiber optic cables. You can shine a light down one meridian and then you'll see a light pop out at another meridian. Is that, what are the implications of findings like this, these super highways of light throughout the body?
Well, there you're touching on the whole field of energy medicine, which is a vast, unknown field, which is taking more and more importance, actually. It's still not, still secondary in mainstream medicine, but it's gradually and surely growing. Many of us working in this field are convinced that it is really the medicine of the future. Eventually, medicine will be energy-based more than chemically based, as is our current drug-oriented medicine. Because with energy interactions, you can have a much more direct effect on cells, on the energy fields that regulate our whole organism. But that's a whole other subject in itself. In terms of light, light is, again, the purest form of energy that we can work with. And so it's obvious that it can be used to interact with our own energy fields. Now, one of the most direct ways to do this is to link light with acupuncture, as you just mentioned. So there are techniques such as color puncture or chromatotherapy, which apply colors on meridians on acupuncture points. So these are very interesting techniques. They kind of amplify the effects of acupuncture. And it also ties into the whole question of biophotons that you kind of alluded to. It seems more and more clear that light plays a key role in the energy exchanges inside our body. And not just any kind of light, but very special kind of photons that have been termed biophotons by Popp, one of the early main researchers in this field, Fritz Albert Popp. And these biophotons are generated by each of our cells. They are regularly emitted and absorbed. And you can measure them, you can detect them if you have extremely sensitive instruments. You can analyze them, see what spectrum they have, what's their rhythm. So there's a whole field of exploring the nature of this light that's literally being emitted by our body. That is still in its infancy, but again, we can assume that it'll be part of the medicine of the future. because these photons seem to be telling a lot by their nature, by their not only the spectrum but also their coherence level. They seem to carry information not only about the body but also about consciousness itself, which is where it becomes very interesting, very fascinating, actually. So that again, that's a whole other subject. Biophotons are very, very faint. It's invisible to the naked eye. We're talking about only a few photons being emitted per second per square centimeters. So it's completely beyond the threshold of our visual perception. You need very, very sensitive photomultipliers to detect them. But there are now such sensors where you can image the biophotons, and it's a really fascinating field. And so it points to the way where light is not just a vector for energy. For example, with photobiomodulation, light is really used as a raw energy source to bring energy to your cells. With biophotons, it indicates that light also can be a vector for information. It can really trigger deep order within our cells in ways that are not yet well understood. So it really opens the gate to a way of healing with light where it won't be only color or energy, the amount of light, but also its quality. It may be the rhythm at which it's delivered, or the polarization at which it's delivered. There are so many different aspects to light that can be influenced. Again, that's part of the medicine of the future.
Yeah, it's something that I think is going to really be, maybe to the later part of my life, be used as a therapeutic agent, and I don't know if we really understand the implications of these ultra weak photon emissions from humans, but I learned from this from Roland Van Wyck's book that you mentioned in your book. How Fritz Albert Popp used onion sprouts to determine that they were emitting photons of some sort. Does this have, implications in, the way that humans interact? We're shooting, I believe it's UVC, the spectrum of these photon emissions. Correct me if I'm wrong on that. But might be a reason why people have a tendency to like holding hands and kissing and being close to each other to sort of get those biophotons the same way that these onion plants were using them to sprout.
Mm-hmm. Well, just to start with, biophotons are not restricted to UV. They really cover the whole spectrum of visible light as well. But that had originally been, it was the source, actually, the discovery of biophotons started with this measurement early in the 20th century of these onion roots, because of course photomultipliers didn't exist back then, so it was an indirect way to measure its effect. Yes, of course, you could assume that this exchange of biophotons will happen between people, and naturally it's part of the non-verbal communication that we all know exists.
Yeah, that's a beautiful idea. I hope it continues to be researched as well, because I want to know more about it. I know on the back of your book there's a little paragraph from Gerald Pollack. I'd love to know your thought, because obviously water is a great interactor with light, and our bodies are mostly water. So what are your thoughts about the interaction between light and water?
Well, I'm sure Gerald probably went in detail in this aspect of things. But one thing that's fascinated me is that the up till recently, it was assumed that the main source of the effect of photobiomodulation, this cellular metabolism influence of light, was related to one specific enzyme, the cytochrome oxidase that was discovered by Tina Carew in the 1990s. So this whole respiratory chain happening in each our cells in the mitochondria that converts glucose into ATP, the energy unit that is used by all our cells. And this cycle, there's one particular step near the end of it where this enzyme converts, is part of the chain in the conversion, and this enzyme that was Carew's discovery is directly stimulated by certain frequencies of light, especially in the deep red and near infrared part of the spectrum. And that's been understood to be one of the main action vectors for photobiomodulation. So the way that the water question ties in is that it might be a second vector through which light stimulates this respiratory chain. Because, as Gerald has explained, light will create this fourth phase. It will create a polarization within the cell membrane, and it will change the viscosity of water. And there is this some incredible phenomenon happening within the mitochondria, which are very dependent on the viscosities of water. And so when you understand that light can change that viscosity, you have another way in which light will accelerate this respiratory chain in a significant way. So now it's like a second mechanism, separate mechanism through which photobiomodulation could be explained through the effect it has on water. The ATP synthase rotors that will work more efficiently in water that's been irradiated with light. So it simply, again, makes us better understand what are the mechanisms that explain why light would be so beneficial for cells.
Yeah, it appears to me that, evolutionarily, we would have been outside all the time, bathed in infrared light pretty much from the moment the sun came up to the moment the sun came down. And we miss out on a lot of that once we step indoors. There's still a lot of infrared coming off everything, but not nearly the amount that you'd get from the sun. So do you use infrared lights in your house to supplement, the light that you may be missing out on?
I certainly do.
Yeah.
Yes. Sure. You can use, of course, photobiomodulation devices. There are many available on the web. But one of the things that I do also is use halogen lighting as much as I can, because naturally incandescent and halogen lights have a large proportion of the energy emitted as near infrared. That's exactly why they've been replaced by LEDs. The whole goal was to cut their energy wastage. And for engineers, this infrared part of the spectrum emitted by these light bulbs is wastage. They couldn't see any function to it. So again, it's a matter of not properly understanding the biology of our interaction with light, because this infrared and near infrared is actually essential to our health. And so by removing it from light bulbs, now we are indirectly creating other health issues. So personally, I consider that, yes, perhaps it will take a bit more energy to light up my halogen lights, but as long as they are available, I will prefer them. In fact, in a northern country like Canada, where I live, most of the year we have to heat the house. So the so-called wastage isn't really wasted, it just contributes to the heat in the house. So again, it's a matter of balance. I feel the slight gain that you would get in terms of energetically, is it worth the impact on health and all the health issues that it causes, all the way to our health systems, hospitals, which will be this lack of infrared will have all kinds of detrimental effects.
Yeah, absolutely. I worry about the hospitals a lot because they're probably the worst places for lighting as far as you can go. So that's a real problem. I've never had a satisfying answer for this question. Maybe you can help me out. What's the difference between infrared light and heat?
Well, heat can take many forms. Heat is basically, it's a thermodynamics concept. It's related to the level of activity of particles, and it can be quantified as a cloud of moving gas particles. That's how temperature is defined. But this activation of a gas particles can be done in a number of ways. It can be done with light, can be done with pressure, it can be done in all kinds of ways. So light or infrared light is one of the ways that can be converted into heat. And the thing is that infrared is quite a vast part of the spectrum. You have near infrared and you have far infrared. It goes up to, I think, 10 or 20,000 nanometers, all the way down. So the part that seems to be relevant in terms of photobiomodulation is the near infrared part, like up to 1,000 or 1,200 nanometers. And beyond that, you will still get a heat phenomenon from the far infrared. This is how sonars work, but they will not act in the same way on cells. They will act more in indirect ways by stimulating blood circulation and things like that. But if you want to get the really photobiological effects of a metabolic stimulation, you need the near infrared part of the spectrum, which is not necessarily linked to heat. It's not that hot.
Right. Okay, that makes a lot more sense to me. There's here in Australia, most people wear sunglasses, and sunglasses here are quite often polarized. Polarized light is very unnatural. I'm not sure if it exists from any natural source, but I don't often hear people talking about the potential dangers of polarizing light and just having, one orientation of waves going through into your eyes. Do we know any of the detrimental effects that could have?
It's a very interesting question. Unfortunately, I don't think that much is known about the effects of polarization on health. For one thing, it doesn't go very deep. Within a couple of millimeters, I believe, polarization is lost. The photons are scattered. So it doesn't have a deep-seated effect. It's, of course, used in sunglasses because it helps with glare for vision. Now, whether it has negative effects, there's nothing that I've heard directly in this respect, but I have heard of positive effects of polarization. There are light therapy modalities that are based on effects of polarized light, because, for example, it's known that within cells, many aspects of biomolecular activity can respond to polarization of light. And so you can stimulate certain metabolic aspects specifically with polarized light. So that some healing modalities are based on that. For example, the bioptron instruments use polarizing filters. And then there are different forms of polarization, which probably have different effects. There's what's called hyperpolarized light, which is also a very interesting thing, developed by a Russian physicist, where you mix polarization of photons, of a number of photons, in many different directions, so that they have a certain proportion that's related to the Fibonacci series. And he relates that to the fact that within cells, many structures are also related to the Fibonacci series. And then when you would polarize light in this way, particular way, you would establish a much more compatibility with the cells. So these are kind of experimental fields currently, which are not, there's no definite answer, but there are all kinds of tantalizing possibilities.
That's fascinating. I wasn't aware of the use of polarization and hyperpolarization like that. That'll be an awesome field to keep up with.
Mm.
You mentioned before that the act of consciousness interacting with these wave particle dualities sort of causes them to, pick one or the other. I've heard that the reason that we perceive all the way from UV to infrared and not beyond is because the UV and infrared portions play quantum roles in the cellular processes of the body. I think it's called the quantum Zeno effect or something like that. Is there any truth to that, to saying we don't see UV and infrared because if we saw them, then their quantum effects would be damaged, I guess?
I've never heard of this particular theory, so I can't really comment on it.
Right.
But what I know is that the reason why we don't see infrared and ultraviolet is very simple. It's because our visual system evolved under sunlight for billions of years. So it's finely tuned to the spectrum of visible light emitted by the sun. And so if you look at the sensitivity of our eyesight, it's right on the spectrum of the sun. So the infrared and ultraviolet, by definition, are the parts that are outside this range. And so my understanding is that this range that we're perceiving is simply a reflection of the light emitted by our sun. So I don't think you have to bring into account these esoteric quantum effects to explain why we have this particular spectrum of vision. But again, I've not heard of that either.
Right. Okay. All right. Awesome. There's quite a growing number of people that are looking into near-death experiences, and they almost always include some sort of ethereal light that seems common across many cultures and almost always exists in these near-death experiences. What do you think the nature of the light in these near-death experiences, or even sort of out-of-body, maybe psychedelic experiences as well? Why does light play such a large role there?
I wish I knew, Cameron. It's a very deep question. It's a question I've been pondering for years. And I don't think there's any simple answer. It's again related to this innate connection that we have between light and the highest forms of consciousness. Why would that be? Is it purely sensorial, just because we associate seeing with having a clearer understanding of or our surroundings? That's one possible explanation. Does it have a deeper meaning in the sense that photons it might be more closer to consciousness than the rest of our reality in the relativistic sense? I mean, we know since restricted relativity that if you move at the speed of light, time stops and space is compressed to nothing. So photons, of course, live in that reality. For light, in a way, time doesn't exist, space doesn't exist. So you can make that link between consciousness, because we also associate consciousness with absence of space and time. It's beyond space and time. if you go in deeper meditation states, you perceive that aspect of consciousness that is beyond space and time. So is there a link there with the very nature of light and the nature of consciousness? That's another way of looking at this. But whatever it may be, to me, it can be used in a very practical and beautiful way. And that's what I do in the Sensora. I try to reproduce light fields that establish a connection with that higher aspect of light, in the sense that it connects us with deeper layers within us, deeper layers of consciousness. In my feeling, this way of working with light is maybe the deepest and most powerful way of healing, is through that aspect of the nature of light. And in the Sensora, that's what I've been striving to achieve. It's you can view it in a way as a kind of bridge between an astral world, the world that we see in our dreams, that's in a way beyond physical reality, but bring it to the physical world where you can use it in practice in a reproducible way, and use it with people to help them to connect with this other reality, where they can really get in touch with a wider space within themselves where healing happens naturally. So it's a bit in a nutshell the intent behind this technology there. Now, in order to achieve that, to create these light fields, there's a number of properties that you want to look for. First, you want to use very pure colors, because these are the colors that touch us most deeply, both in psychological terms and in biological terms. The pure light sources, meaning the most monochromatic it is, the more impact it has. That's well established. Then you will want to use light which may interact also with brainwaves, so which has subtle pulsations embedded within it. You may want to use light which fluctuates gently, so that it's more organic, more natural. If you use a fixed color, you kind of restrict the field of consciousness, whereas if you have an open moving field, then it again brings up different things. So there are many different aspects in the way you will create specific light patterns to work in that direction. And so that's what I've been doing with the Sensora. I use arrays of low frequency oscillators, up to 60 of them in the current version that I work with. So we have all these oscillators that are working together in resonant ways, and that create these beautiful flowing light patterns that have specific frequencies embedded in them. So depending on what you're trying to achieve in therapeutic terms, you will work with particular parts of the spectrum, both in terms of color and in terms of low frequency resonances that are part of the field.
That's amazing. The more I read about Sensora, the more I really wanted to have a go and see what it was all about. Are there ways we can, sort of mimic the effects of the Sensora at home? Like, are there any systems that people could get, or anything that we could try to sort of use light therapeutically and see how we go with it?
Well, the Sensora is kind of designed for a professional therapist, so it's a large, expensive installation. But exactly for the purpose that you just described, I boiled down the technology to a smaller object that you can put in your home. It's the sensosphere that you see in the back there. The light, of course, doesn't come much through the video camera here, but it's designed to emit a smaller version of light patterns that I've evolved for Sensora. So it's a kind of beautiful harmonizing object that you can have in your home. So that's one possibility. I'm actually working on a even smaller version here that you can hold in your hand. That's called Sensor Light. And again, that has an array of low-frequency oscillators creating gentle pulsations. And the Sensolite is nearly ready. It's still at the prototype stage, but within a few months it'll be available.
Wow, I must admit, I've been mesmerized by that this whole time. The Sensora, is it an audio-visual experience? So there's music as well, is that correct?
Yes. In the beginning, I was experimenting with sound together with my therapist colleague, Ma Premo. So I created instruments to create sound fields and we could see the impact they had on the form of therapy that we were practicing. Then, as I mentioned, I became interested in brainwave and then in light. And then it became obvious that when you combine these senses together, you can go much deeper. And that's actually been validated in a number of studies. For example, the recent studies working with gamma brainwaves. You just mentioned the link with Alzheimer's. It seems that gamma brainwaves could be especially beneficial to reduce the amyloid plaque load in the brain that is affected by Alzheimer's. Just pulsing light or sound at this frequency range, 40 hertz is what's been studied most, seems to have a direct effect in decreasing the amyloid plaque on the brain, which is quite remarkable. This is very recent research from Dr. Tsai, the Harvard Medical School in the last 3-4 years. An interesting study that came out recently compared the effects of just that phenomenon when you do it with either just with the sound or with light. And when you do it with both, it's demultiplied. Like when you do it with sound or light, you will have this effect on the particular part of the cortex linked to that sense, auditory cortex or visual cortex. But if you do it on both together, you see that very quickly the effect spreads to other cortical areas. So when it's multi-sensorial, you seem to reach deeper and more numerous areas of the cortex. It goes beyond the limits of the particular sense that you're stimulating. So in Sensora, early on, we perceived this intuitively. We could see that when combined sound and light, it had a more powerful effect. And in fact, we added a third sense, which we feel is also a key to effective therapeutic effects. And it's the sense of kinesthetic perception. And the way we do this is through a special chair or table, which has an array of sound transducers converting sound into low frequency vibrations that you can perceive kinesthetically. You perceive it as a gentle massage on the surface of your skin. And so that third sense, to touch, proprioception, is another way to reach the brain, which is also very powerful. And in Sensora, we mix all three together, and this is where you can have the deepest impact.
Yeah, that's awesome. The more I read about it, the more I just wanted to hop in one and see. But I think that would be a great way to finish this off. I recommend everyone get your book, Light Therapies. It's probably the best book I've got on light, and I've got a lot of books on light. So yeah, thank you so much for coming.
By the way, there are a couple of Sensoras in Australia currently.
Whereabouts are they?
One Adelaide, and one in the Perth area that's just been installed recently.
Wow, are these with are these in practices?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Wow. Hopefully more come out my way to New South Wales. That would be great. And I think more and more practitioners are starting to see that this stuff really works, and oftentimes it works very, very powerfully. So yeah, thanks so much for coming on and discussing your work. hopefully more people get involved with the stuff that you've been doing. And yeah, thank you so much.
It's my pleasure. It's exciting times because just in the last couple of years, there's been new studies made with the Sensora, which are very positive. There's been a study made with people with chronic pain and a study made with people with depression, where we can establish more clearly the beautiful effects that you can have with this type of approach. So indeed, now is the time for these new technologies to really spread more to the mainstream and to become commonplace, really. Hopefully it will happen in the next few years.
Fingers crossed. All right. Thanks so much, man. Cheers.
All right. Bye.
Thank you so much for listening. I really hope this episode was enjoyable and insightful. Please keep up to date with the podcast. I've got a bunch of guests lined up for the next few months, so make sure you're following me on social media using @Ricci Flow Nutrition so you don't miss an episode. Thanks again, everyone. Take care.